I'm Steve Hare for NCW Live News, joined by our 12th District House Representative Carrie Condata. And Carrie's here to give us an update on the legislative session, which is about to go into its third special session after ending the regular session back on April 23rd. And of course, everything is revolving around the budget and the education funding as ordered by the State Supreme Court in its McCleary decision, and other legislative matters as well, because when you go into a special session, everything's back into the agenda, including legislation. We'll talk about a major piece of legislation that right now is a source of contention in the legislature. But first, Carrie, give us an update on the budget, and especially as it relates to the education funding aspect of that.
Well, Steve, as you know, the education group has been meeting daily. They've put in a lot of hours and a lot of time, and I think what they've finally come to is a final point of perhaps impasse. Let's hope not. Let's hope that they can put it together. But it's been a long, arduous procedure. What I can tell you is that the money is no longer the issue. The dollars and cents on both sides of the aisle have been agreed to. That's not the problem. It's how you administer it locally versus state. We're still having this issue with the levy swap. And the two sides have different versions of how they want to do that. And there's reasons for that, because no matter how you do a levy swap, you're going to have winners and losers. And depending how you formulate it, certain parts of the state may have some increases in taxes, particularly Seattle, and other ways might shift in a different direction. So that's really the final sticking point. But the budget is held up because you can't do the budget really till you finalize that piece.
So who is advantaged more by the levy swap? Would it be the rural or the urban school districts?
Well, under the Senate and both the, and to some extent the House Republican plan, the rural areas do really well for the most part. There's a few exceptions, but for the most part you would see a tax shift from eastern Washington and rural areas in north and south of Seattle into King County. And that is because it becomes a more progressive tax. In effect, exactly what our Democrat friends have been asking for is a more progressive tax, but it's in property tax rather than what they would prefer as an income tax. So that's the hang up. And if you take the plan and shift it the other way, then you have inequity issues. Mm-hmm. And remember what the court said, adequacy and equality. And that's the two stumbling blocks we're trying to solve, and it's not an easy puzzle.
Well, certainly the education element of the budget is the linchpin, really, because without it, you don't have a budget.
We could conceivably have one, but we didn't solve the problem that has to be solved, and that's McCleary. And nobody wants to go back to court, and nobody wants to go through this again. And so even though it's taking more time, I am hoping, we'll know in the next few days, that we get this breakthrough, that we get it done and put this to bed, because there are so many other things to deal with.
So, as far as the budget's concerned, where are we overall in that?
The budget is fascinating. I just got off the phone with our budget director, and it's fairly fascinating to this degree. There's only 3% difference between the two budget positions, and there's more resistance to negotiation than ever before. It's like we have come from this far apart to this far apart and can't close that gap. Now, I think if the education program comes together, that gap will come together. Mm-hmm. So the feeling is on the Hill that if education gets solved, if the package comes together, the rest will come into place. Now, there's a lot of optimism down there. This is going to get done by the end of the month. It needs to. The budget ends on June 30th. Mm-hmm. So, but on the other hand, any little glitch along the way could upset the cart.
Well, at this point in time, I think both sides, Republican and Democrat, have to, move off of their original arguments, don't they? And that.
Yeah, and it has happened. I mean, there's no doubt in the education. I followed the education thing every day. David Taylor's our lead negotiator. He's one of my best friends, and he calls me every other day or every day now. And they have moved significantly together, but they've moved to the point where, again, they've hit this one wall. And it always seems like there's just one thing. They get 10 things done, and there's one they can't get over. But I have faith that both can move. It's not that far apart, and I think we will have a solution. It's just a question of whether we have it in time. Because frankly, the budget takes 2 weeks to process from beginning to end. So we have to have this education plan done by late next week, or we're in trouble.
Is there a possibility you could go into a continuing resolution on the budget?
There's contingency plans being made. We just heard that from our chief of staff, that they are looking at all the contingency options, but there is a general feeling that this is going to come together. All the leadership folks have said so. We've done it before. Remember, we were there till July 8th, but we got it done. And so there is precedent, but I think we'll know more by the end of next week. If the education package comes together, I say we're okay. If not, we have a serious problem.
Well, thanks for the update on the budget and the education funding. Kerry Kandata is our 12th District House Republican here. And of course, you're joined by Mike Steele in the House of Representatives,
Yes.
and Brad Hawkins, of course, in the Senate. Let's talk about some legislation. And I think that first and foremost, a lot of farmers and communities here on the east side of the mountains very concerned about the Supreme Court Hearst decision and how the legislature is going to address it.
There is no question this is the big piece of legislation that affects Eastern Washington more than even the education plan or the tax and budget plan. This is a very unusual decision by the courts, but it basically shuts down water throughout the rural areas. This is all being pushed not only by the courts, but right now by a group of Seattle legislators. There's a large group of Seattle legislators because that's where the population is, and they have come to the conclusion they want to stick with this decision. And it is not tolerable to those of us out here. It's just not necessary. I don't think Seattle understands the water situation out here, and they're trying to implement their issues on us. And this has been a big sticking point the last few years, that if folks in Seattle who have moved their caucus considerably to the left have really tried to become the statewide model. And that's not right. I don't care personally what Seattle does. They can do whatever they want, but they're meddling with our livelihood, our farming, and our water situation. So this has to be solved. Now, we're fortunate in one respect that the capital budget is a very important budget for a lot of folks, and the Senate holds the capital budget, and so does the House, because you have to have 60 votes for a capital budget. So we're in control of this, and we are not going to let that capital budget out until we get an agreement on Hearst. But they are not moving. And it's our leaders met with the governor yesterday. The governor wants to move. He'd like to get it done, but frankly, the Seattle legislators are drawing a line in the sand.
Now, just as a general explanation of the Hearst decision, it basically is a high court ruling that restricts the withdrawal of water from wells, and that definitely is a major source of water here on the east side of the Cascades.
And one of the factors there is metering, putting a meter on every single well in the state of Washington. And of course, that's a very contentious issue. So we're going to keep working through it. I think the capital budget holding that up is probably helping. I hope the governor will break the impasse, because it's really the Seattle legislators, not the total Democrat caucus, that are creating this problem. But this is serious. This creates a tremendous property tax issue and a property tax shift, as properties would be severely devalued if they can't do water. And you know what's funny? It's not funny, but the fact is, if Hearst doesn't come together, it'll scuttle any of the education plans on this levy swap, because the values all change. And frankly, we will have no money for rural school districts. It's amazing how that all comes together.
One thing affects another.
It does, and we need to get the whole package. So we're going to keep working around the clock and see if we can get this done.
Kerry Kandata joining us with an update on the legislature here on NCW Life News. I'm Steve Hare.